Hello, good evening. Wei here. How is everybody? Are you all well? Have you all been good today? Have you all been busy? I hear today that poor little Saoirse had to be sent home from nursery because she was not feeling too good and she had quite a high temperature. So that's a shame. I hope you're better in the morning, Saoirse, and I'm sure you will be. I'm sure you will be. Well, we've been doing lots of Mr. Men books, but we've had a special request from Julia, who wants to know the story of Moses. Well, Moses is a Bible story, and it sort of follows on from Joseph and his dream coat. So I've had a look here, and I've got this book here. Oh, it's really heavy. Oh, just about lift it up. It's called 366 Bible Stories, and it was given to Julia Aureliano and Florencia's daddy when he was a little boy, and he went to Sunday school, and it says presented to Tom Rayner by Thorney Abbey Church, May 1992. And it's all Bible stories. It is, yeah, and lots of Bible stories in here. It's something that maybe Tom would take back to Ecuador. So you can all read. It's got Joseph and Noah's Ark and all that stuff in there. Anyway, I'm going to tell you all about Moses. Now it's quite a long story, and um, there's lots of nasty things happening in it. People getting killed and all kinds of things like that. It's a bit Old Testament, it's a bit traditional Bible. These gods back then they didn't have cause a ruckus. Anyway, we will read it, and you can make your mind up for yourselves. Okay, there we go. It's way away. I'm just going to make myself a little bit bigger if I can. There we go. Tiny bit bigger. Holly's just gone into a basket to go to sleep for the night. So I'm reading Holly a bedtime story as well as you. So this picture is Joseph's brothers and their wives and their families and his dad, who was called Jacob, wasn't he? Well, he changed his name to Israel a bit later on. Anyway, this is them all going to Egypt. They've sent camels for them, and they packed all the belongings on, and they're all entering Egypt, where Joseph's invited them to stay to see out the famine. I don't know who's who on that picture. You'd have to work it out. I don't really know. I think it's just a general shot, nothing particular. And there, whoops, I'm in the way, aren't I? There is Joseph, and that's him. He was Pharaoh's number 2, and he is overseeing the harvest of the grain. This is the 7 good years before the 7 bad years, and they're getting all the grain ready, toiling in the fields, cutting the grain with those little knives called sickles. Didn't have combine harvesters back then, and gathering it all in and putting it in storehouses so that they could see out the famine. And that's what happened, isn't it? That's what happened. So So many, many years after Joseph's brothers and dad came to Egypt, long after Joseph had died, the descendants of Jacob, who changed his name to Israel, so they were called Israelis. They stayed in Egypt and did rather well. They worked hard and they made lots of money, and they became quite a numerous people and very strong and rich. And Pharaoh was getting a bit worried. He was thinking, I've got all these people in my land. They're growing greater in number, and if not careful, they'll be taking the place over. It's a familiar story. This refugees move from one land to another. The people who live there don't really want them. Then they start getting worried about them. Anyway, so Pharaoh's plan was to turn the Israelis into slaves and make them work in the fields and build things. And he was still worried about them, even though they'd been subjugated. And so what he decided was that every male child born to an Israeli family would be put to death immediately by drowning it in the River Nile. Isn't that awful? What a terrible thing. Anyway, not long after this order was given, a baby boy was born to this woman here. She was really worried. She didn't want a baby boy to be drowned. So what she did, she kept it hidden, kept the boy hidden for 3 months after his birth. And when they couldn't really keep it hidden any longer, the mother took a reed basket she'd woven. She coated it with tar, which is like a black, sticky, oily substance to make it waterproof so it wouldn't sink. And then she put the baby in the basket and placed it among the bulrushes in the riverbank. Now, this is a very famous story, Moses in the bulrushes, because she put the baby where she knew that the princess from the palace came down to the river to bathe. She came down with a handmaid and servants, and she saw the baby and sent one of the maids in to get it. She found the baby crying, and she recognized it as a child of the Israelis. She was filled with pity for the infant, and the baby's sister, who'd been hiding in the reeds nearby, went up to her and said, "Would you like me to find an Israeli nursemaid to look after the baby?" The Pharaoh's daughter thought that was a great idea, and she said, "Yes, please." So the young girl went away. Do you know what she did? She got her mother to come. Of course, the mother was the baby's real mother, wasn't she? So she ended up being the nurse for her own child. So the baby was raised safely with its own mother and brought up by the princess as her own son. She gave him the name Moses, which meant in Egyptian, saved from the water. Moses remained at the Pharaoh's court, where he studied, worked hard, got a good education, and became a sort of a clerk and a helper around the palace. Quite a good job. Anyway, there was a bit of a problem. Moses got into trouble and he ended up killing an Egyptian, which wasn't a good idea, I can tell you. So he had to scarper, he had to run for it, get out and go to the desert where he would be followed, where they wouldn't find him. Anyway, he wandered around for a while and then he came to a well to get some water. And there were some sisters there who come to water their flocks. The other shepherds were bullying them, saying, "You can't have the water. It's ours, it's ours. And Moses said, oi, you let them water their flocks. And the sisters were so grateful to Moses for helping them out. They took him back to the camp of their father, who was called Jethro. And he was very pleased to see Moses. I think he could have done with a bit of help around the place. And he said, you must stay here and you can marry one of my daughters. How's that sound? And Moses thought, oh, that sounds all right. And that's what he did. So he stayed with Jethro and his new wife, who isn't named in the book, and spent his days grazing flocks of sheep. A bit like Joseph used to do, really. Anyway. Well, one day when he was out in the desert, Moses saw this really weird thing. There was a strange sight. There was a bush that was burning with flames, really fierce hot flames. But the bush was just burning. It wasn't turning to ash and being destroyed. The flames were just coming out of it, and it was not falling to bits. Although in this picture, it does look as if it was falling to bits. But anyway, in the Bible, it wasn't. And Moses went up to the bush. He thought, this is amazing. Must go and have a look. He went up to the bush, and when he got nearby, he heard a voice. Moses, Moses, here I am. Talking bush. Now there is something. Moses said, oh, what are you? And the voice said, come no closer, Joseph. Come no closer, Moses. Take your sandals off, because the place you're standing on is holy ground. And Moses did so, and the voice continued. It said, I am the Lord God. I have seen the misfortunes of my people in Egypt, and I have chosen you to free them. You're going to go to the Pharaoh and tell him to let my people go. Well, Moses was a bit worried about this. You want me to go to the Pharaoh and tell him to let all the Israelites go? Free them from slavery? He won't believe me. He'll probably have me killed. What shall I say? And the Lord said to him, God said to him, you will say this to the people of Israel. I have been sent by Jehovah, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham and Isaac, people going back a bit, and of Jacob, to lead you out of Egypt into the promised land. Jehovah's just another name for God. When he says, I'm Jehovah, he just sort of said, I'm God. And with that, the bush went, it burned with a flame so bright, poor old Moses had to put his cloak up to shield his eyes, otherwise he would have been blinded. Anyway, he left Jethro and the flocks, left his wife, and went back into Egypt to the Pharaoh's palace. And there he said to the Pharaoh, you've got to let the people go. I've seen this burning bush in the desert. It was God. And God says, let the people go. You shouldn't enslave them. It's outrageous. You've got to let them go. And Pharaoh said, ain't going to happen, mate. Ain't going to happen, Moses. They're useful laborers. I need them. No chance. So Moses said, well, look, if you don't, terrible things are going to happen. There's going to be punishments. We'll call them the plagues of Egypt. And these are all the nasty things that God did to the Egyptians to try to force them to let the people, to let the Israelites sides go. First of all, the waters of the River Nile were changed into blood and flowed red. But nobody could drink it because it wasn't proper water. It was all bloody and horrible. Ooh. Then the land was invaded by frogs. It's not too bad, is it? A few frogs. Quite like frogs. Then by mosquitoes and flies. Well, I'm not really fond of that. All the livestock died off. The Egyptians were stricken with sores and skin rashes. The fields were destroyed first by hailstones, then by locusts. I suppose they're like grasshoppers there. And then, for 3 days, there was complete darkness. As each plague arrived, the Pharaoh sent for Moses and promised him that he'd let the people go. But as soon as the plague was over, he changed his mind again. Then Moses warned him of the worst plague of all. The firstborn child of every person in Egypt was going to die. From the Pharaoh to the humblest servant, they're all going to die. And so it came about that on the night, all the firstborn of the Egyptians died, while all the firstborn of the Israelis were untouched. Well, that sounds awful, doesn't it? It does. Do you know how they did it? They did it like this. The Israelis painted a little red splodge on their door so that when the angel of death, that's one of God's terror weapons, came along, it knew that that was an Israeli door and it shouldn't kill anybody in there. And all the other houses, it went in and killed the firstborn. Who's the firstborn? Uh-oh. Now, if it was happening today, it's not going to happen today. It would be Julia and Arthur. If you were Egyptians, you got the chop. Terrible. What a thing to do. This God is, gets in a bit of a mood. Does all kinds of things. Anyway, the Israelis, they still celebrate this event even today. There's a big holiday in Israel, and they have this thing. It's the Feast of the Passover. It's a bit like their Christmas. They have a nice big meal and a big celebration, and celebrate all these poor Egyptians being killed. Anyway, that was enough for Pharaoh. He said, "Get out, a lot of you, go on, I've had enough. All these poor people dead. Just clear off." So Moses led the Israelis out of Egypt, but wasn't finished yet. Pharaoh kept changing his mind. Suddenly decided that, hang on, we need these people. We need the labour, really. So he chased after them with his army to bring them back and knock a few heads to teach them a lesson. The Israelis came to a big sea and they couldn't get across it. And what are we going to do? And Pharaoh's army was coming up behind. They're all going to get caught. But old Moses, he got his staff and he went, "By the power of God, part the waters." And the waters went, shh. The sign there was a dry path through the middle. And the Israelis bombed through as quick as they could. And the Egyptians, close on their heels, chasing after them. But as soon as the Israelis got to the other side, God broke the spell and all the water came back in and it drowned the Egyptian army. All of them whoosh, went underwater. Hundreds and hundreds of people were drowned. I don't know. What a thing. told you this was a violent story. Anyway, so there the Israelis are in the desert, and they had to leave in a bit of a hurry, so they haven't got a lot of supplies or anything like that, and they were all getting a bit hungry. They only got a few biscuits to eat. So Moses said to God, "What am I going to do? We're all going to starve if we're not careful." God said, "Oh no, I'll provide. Don't you worry." So after 3 days of marching, they marched to this place, and God told Moses to strike the rock with his staff. He did whack, and where he struck, a big split opened, and fresh water came pouring out of the rock. So they had enough water to drink. That was all right. But what are they going to do for food? Well, next day, all around their camp, they found a huge flock of quail. Quail are like birds that you can eat, like big chickens. It's quite nice. And there was enough of them for the people to eat. So they had a nice quail dinner. Next day, on the ground, there was a sweet white substance. I wondered what it was, so they tasted it. Oh, and it was nice. It was lovely to eat. It was a bit like bread, but it was very nourishing. Moses said to God, "What's this stuff called?" And God said, "It's manna from heaven, and that'll keep you going in the desert when you get across." Well, that was all right, wasn't it? So they got water, they got food, and they're stuck in the desert. Then they've been journeying towards what they call the Promised Land. That was the land of Canaan, which is Israel, modern Israel. And there was a high mountain on the route called Mount Sinai. And when they got there, God said to Moses, "I want you up the mountain. I want you to climb up to the top of the mountain. And I've got a few things to sort out with you." So Moses went up to the top of the mountain. He was there for ages. He was there for 40 days, 40 nights. And while he was up there, God gave him 2 stone tablets on which there was written 10 laws. And these are called the 10 Commandments. Have you ever heard of the 10 Commandments? They're the basis of sort of common law ever since. And, sort of regular, sensible things, if you like. So the 10 Commandments, what were they? So I'll read them out to you. The first one was that there's only one God. You're not going to worship any other God but me. I'm God. You worship me. Because before then, people used to worship all kinds of gods. There used to be a god of the sea, god of thunder, god of war, god of wine. Yeah. And the Greeks, they're the god for everything. But God, Jehovah told Moses, "I'm God. There's only one. It's me. Worship me." Number 2, you mustn't worship any statues or images which you made yourselves. Just worship me. Number 3, don't take the name of God in vain. In other words, don't say, "I can't swear, I mustn't swear." But you mustn't curse using God's name. Rule number 4, remember to keep the Sabbath. The Sabbath day is Sabbath, Sunday. Holy to God. You're not supposed to work on Sunday, but we all do these days, don't we? You've got to go to church and keep it holy. Number 5, respect your father and your mother. Number 6, you must not kill. I always thought that was a bit rich. He used to tell me the story when I was in Sunday school. And when you got to this one, I always thought, Well, it's a bit rich. This God's saying don't kill, and he's killed Egyptian children. He's killed Egyptian soldiers. He's caused famine and all. Anyway, one rule for him, one rule for the rest of us. That's what I say. You shall not kill. It's a good rule. You shall not commit adultery. That means that when you get married, you've got to stay with your wife, and you've not got to have other girlfriends and things like that. Number 8, you must not steal. Yeah, that's good. Number 9, you should not tell lies. You should always be truthful. Number 10, you mustn't be jealous. You mustn't look at other people's wives or husbands and say, they look nice. I wish she was my wife. And you mustn't look at next door's car and think, what a nice car. So you mustn't be jealous. Anyway, these are the 10 commandments. And God carved them on stone for Moses. That's probably why it took 40 days. And then Moses carried them down. When he got down to the bottom of the mountain, what had happened? All the Israelis had melted down all the gold they could find, and they'd made this calf, this golden calf, and they were worshipping this as a god. Oh, well, that's against one of the commandments, isn't it? Moses was blooming mad. He was. He hurled the commandments, stone tablets down, and they smashed, and he shouted at everybody and made them go away. Oh, he was furious. He looked at the tablets and went, God, no, broken the 10 commandments. All of them at once. I don't know. Anyway, God said, you better come up the mountain and I'll give you another set. Look after these this time. In fact, what you need to do is tell the people all about the commandments and what's going to happen. I'm the only God. Worship in me. That's it. You do that, I'll look after you. And what you need to do is build a nice box, and when I give you the new commandments, stick them in there, keep them safe, because they're the word of me, word of God. So they did. They built this box, and they call it the Ark. It's not like Noah's Ark. It's an ark's another name for a chest. So it's called the Ark of the Covenant. And the covenant is an agreement. So it's an agreement between God and his people. He tells them what to do. They do it, and everybody's happy. So they made the Ark, and that's what kept them. Now, at some stage in history, they lost the Ark. They don't know where it is. Some people think it might have gone to Ethiopia, but nobody knows really. We're not even sure where it was, whatever it is. But anyway, there we go. So they're getting quite close to the promised land, the land of Canaan. And as Moses gets there, he sends his right-hand man, this bloke called Joshua, that's him in the front, and some scouts to go out and have a look, see what the promised land looks like, the land of Canaan. So they go there, and after a few days they come back and they say, wow, that is one heck of a place. Look at these grapes that we got. There's so many grapes growing on this grapevine. It takes 2 people to carry them. And the land was flowing with milk and honey. That's what they said. They called it the land of milk and honey. Anyway, Canaan is very fertile. Great place to live. So they're all getting very excited about this. And they're sitting in the camp thinking, wow, this is going to be wonderful. What a place to live. Everything's going to be sorted out. We don't have to eat any more manna, quail. Get a bit sick of quail. It's manna. It's nice, but it gets in your teeth. And a bit of wine would be nice instead of this water out of the spring. But they're just sitting around camp having a chat about this wonderful new place they're going to, when there's a big light, and God appears above them all, and he says, well, here we are. We're close to the land of Canaan, but That's good news. But the bad news is none of you are going to enter the land of Canaan. I'm not going to give it to you. I'm going to give it to your children and their children's children. You're going to stay in the desert for 40 years. And that's it. That's what they had to do. They had to stay in the desert for 40 years. And old Moses, and they are camped in the desert. A bit miserable. They've got nice tents, but a bit miserable. 40 years of manna. Quail. Oh, well. Moses, the man who'd led them all and done everything God had asked of him, been a proper bloke. God said to him, look, Moses, I really like you, but you're not going to go into the promised land either. You're going to die in the desert with all the others here. Your children, they can go, but not you. So that's what happened. They stayed there for years and years and years. And finally, after 40 years, they were allowed to cross into the promised land, the land of Canaan. Well, the big city, yeah, I mean, it wasn't empty land. There were other people living there. And just like the Egyptians haven't been too keen on having the Israelis about, these other people were like, well, don't want a load of refugees coming across the border. Hang on. Have you got the right visa? No, you haven't. You stay in the desert. Anyway, they sent spies in, and there's a spy sneaking into the city to have a look round to see what was what. They were really strong cities, but God said, stick with me, and you'll be all right. So Joshua, Moses was dead. Joshua had taken over, and Joshua led the children of Israel, the Israelites, across the River Jordan. He did the old part in the waters trip again, God did, so they could walk across on dry land. They got rid of the camels and swapped them for donkeys, and across they went. And when they got to the other side, there was a big city. The big city was called Jericho. And they decided they got to destroy Jericho. They said, right, we want all you people living in Jericho to move out because we're taking over. God's told us we can have this place, and off you go, bye. The people of Jericho said, well, what? You're kidding me. I mean, what would you do? What would Wayway Nidia do if a load of people on donkeys turned up and said, God says we can have your house, off you go. Don't know where you're going to go, but off you go. What would she say? Hang on, lock the door, quick, call the police. That's what she would say. Anyway, the people of Jericho, they said something similar. Go away. Nothing. No, it's not a deal. So what happened was that Joshua and the soldiers they had with him weren't powerful enough to take the city. But God said, march around the city walls carrying the Ark of the Covenant. That's this big box that the Ten Commandments are in. And blow your trumpets. When they blew the trumpets, all the walls fell down. That's more people dead, isn't it? And the war, which is basically what it was, for the land of Canaan, for Israel, lasted quite a long time. But eventually, the Joshua and his armies prevailed. And one of the battles that they fought was against something called the armies of the five kings, and Joshua took them by surprise, and he was winning, but it was getting dark. So what he did was he held his spear up. He said to God, Stop the sun in the sky so we can finish the battle and win. God, stop the sun. So that day lasted for, I don't know, instead of 24 hours, it probably lasted for 30 hours. And when the battle was over, that was it. The Israelis had conquered the whole land. Joshua was famous as the first king of the Israelis and a great warrior and leader. And that's that. What do you think? There's it's quite gruesome, isn't it? I'm not sure I like this bit of the Bible. I'm not sure I like any of the Bible. I mean, Joseph's quite a good story, but Moses, it's all death and destruction, plagues and things, and taking land off of the people that lived there for generations. And the land of Israel is a war zone to this day. The Arabs think it's theirs, the Israelis think it's theirs, and they're still fighting over it 2,000, no more, 4,000 years later. It's an area of great conflict. Anyway, Moses, that's him. Moses among the bulrushes. The man who was brought up by Pharaoh's daughter ended up causing no end of damage to Egypt, scuttling off and leading all the Israelis back, children of Israel, Joseph and his dad's descendants, and taking them to the promised land of Canaan. That's it. Find it interesting? You think it's a good story? It's quite a good story. It's a very famous story. There's lots of paintings. If you ask your mum and dad to Google Moses in the book, there'll be lots of great paintings. There'll be pictures of him in the bulrushes. I'll try and find some for you, and I'll show them to you tomorrow, maybe. How's that? That'd be good. It's getting quite late now. It's a long story, so I'm going to say night night. I'll see you soon. Lots of love. Love to everybody in Ecuador. Love to everybody in Seoul. I hope she's better soon. Bye bye. See you soon.